The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, has written or is writing to all schools to tell them that the default position must be to share their material on sex lessons given to kids with parents. Some parents have said, tell us what you're teaching our children in sex education lessons, and the schools say we can't for copyright reasons. I think it's something to do with the companies that supply some of the sex education courses. Anyway, Gillian Keegan has said actually the right of parents to know trumps any copyright considerations, and therefore if parents want to know what their kids are being taught in sex education lessons, schools should have to tell them. I find it incredible that at the moment many schools are resisting that. Who brings up parents? Who brings up parents? Well, nobody brings up parents. Who brings up children? Is it parents? Is it mums and dads? Or is it the state? That's what this is all about. Let's talk to a writer, campaigner and mother, Joanne Nadler. Hello, Joanne.
Hello. Hi, Kevin.
Thanks for joining us. Now, do you share my surprise that some schools resist telling parents what their kids are being taught in sex education lessons? Some parents, I guess, will be pretty laissez-faire about it. Others want to know. Surely they have the right to know, don't they? Why are schools resisting telling them?
Well, I'd like to say I share your surprise. And if you'd asked me sort of 4 or 5 years ago, then yes, I'd have been very shocked. But actually what I've discovered over the last 3 or 4 years myself is that schools are sometimes very cagey about sharing this information with parents. And I think, you know, approaching this in good faith, I think it's often because the schools themselves feel that they're not at liberty to share this material because of the point that Gillian Keegan has highlighted again today, which is this, in my view, erroneous argument that there is a copyright issue here. I mean, if you looked at it in the context of any other subject that was taught in school, I think people would find it quite bizarre that somehow materials that were being considered appropriate for a classroom was somehow not appropriate to be shared with parents.
Is this copyright consideration? Is that because a private company compiles these sex education courses or something and they have the copyright over? I don't quite understand how copyright law comes into this debate.
Well, I mean, you raise a very good question there. And my own view is that I think it is being used, as I say, erroneously. I think the bigger question, in essence, is this issue of sort of commercial sensibility and firms suggesting that they have got some kind of right over this material because they have compiled these lessons. But as I say, if you applied that to any other subject in the curriculum, it just really wouldn't stand scrutiny. And you do have to ask, if these operators are going into schools with the best intentions, why would they want to keep this material from parents? It just does raise a lot of suspicions, which quite easily could be put to rest if the material was easily available.
Absolutely. And some of the issues in question are that apparently in some lessons, some of this material, kids have been asked if they were planet non-binary. And they've been taught about breast binders, which is presumably for little girls who want to be little boys or something. And they've also been taught about a galaxy of genders. As I say, some parents might say, that's fine. I know quite a few parents who at the very least would want to know the details of how this information was being put across. And as I said earlier, Joanne, the way I see this comes down to this question: who raises children? Is it the state or is it mothers and fathers? And I think most people in this country, including me, would say surely it must be the latter.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I do think we've seen a perceptible shift, actually, in the extent to which the state feels that it has the right to raise children. And this is manifested completely in this whole issue. And what I think you're going to hear over the next few days is a number of providers, perhaps those that aren't operating in best faith, and some of the teaching unions, I'm afraid, arguing that this is a hugely confected issue and a hugely exaggerated issue. And just to give you some kind of indication that I really, first of all, anecdotally, I suspect very many parents watching this programme will have encountered similar issues themselves, and will have heard at the school gate some fairly sort of hair-raising materials being raised. But I accept that's anecdotal. If we're going to look at this in a more sort of empirical sense, I mean, I wrote quite a long report about some of this material for a think tank called Civitas that was published earlier in the year. And we did polling of over 1,000 school-age pupils. And I mean, just to give you an idea, you know, 67% of those polled said that they had been told at school that sex is assigned at birth, for instance. Now, that is a very contentious statement, and it is one which is which chimes with a particular ideological take on gender. It's something arguably that one could discuss in sociology lessons in sixth form, but it'd be perfectly reasonable for parents to want to know how that's being discussed, what the context is, whether there's any sort of wider discussion around the idea, or whether it's just been presented merely as fact. So it's that kind of thing. We looked at a lot of these areas, and, you know, it was evident that quite a lot of controversial ideas are now being discussed in school, and without being able to see the materials, it's impossible to tell whether they're being discussed, you know, with appropriate, shall we say, relevant, with appropriate facts, with appropriate range of opinions behind them.
And I think that some parents, possibly many, fear that these lessons that they don't know about, their children are being taught an ideology, being brainwashed with an ideology. And the reasoning behind that, let me know what you think about this, I suspect is that schools and teachers, they think this is important, you know, we're getting across fashionable viewpoints, this is the modern way of thinking, and you can't really trust these Neanderthal parents to understand all of this, and therefore we must keep them out of the equation. Well, the schools must be stopped in this endeavour, mustn't they?
Well, I mean, I think it is quite tough on schools, because what's happened really over the last 20 years is there's been a whole raft of new legislation that's impacted on schools, particularly via the Equalities Act. And it is now incumbent on schools to teach a lot of this material. And I think what has happened is that many schools feel that they're not equipped to do it. So rather than them having a particularly cynical attitude to parents, because I'm sure for the most part, most schools would like to work constructively with parents, but they just feel they're out of their depth. And what they've done is reach out to these agencies, many of whom are completely unaccountable, many of whom have, you know, set themselves up on the back of an envelope, quite frankly, with no particular expertise. And some of whom are presenting material that does constitute a safeguarding concern. I mean, at my son's school, you know, I and many other parents were very alarmed to see the nature of some of the material that was being presented to children upwards from age 11, which, as I say, incorporated a lot of very controversial ideas about gender identity, about concepts like heteronormativity, toxic masculinity, and sex positivity. Now, all of those things should ring slight alarm bells with parents, because they are drawn from a particular political viewpoint, which sort of shorthand for which is intersectionality. And, you know, it's not your run-of-the-mill biological explanation of the birds and the bees. It's a very, very long way from that. Nobody's been asked whether we want this in schools. And I think teachers and parents are somewhat out of their depth on this.
Yeah, it's a worrying issue, but very good to talk to you about it, Joanne. Thank you very much for your time. Joanne Naylor there, writer and campaigner, and in this context, a mother of one.